Welcome to Worthy Mother Podcast. This episode is for all you high achievers out there who have become moms, those of you who grew up as high performers and have always desired just to live up to your full potential. I know there are so many of you who listen, and I can relate. I know for me, becoming a mother was really a wild experience in that I could no longer keep up with this former idea I had of what it meant to be good enough. And I've had to really overcome my own limiting beliefs within that role of being a mother to realize what I am truly capable of and what success actually means for me in my life, in this role, in all the other things that I do besides being a mother. So today we are going to talk about limiting beliefs that you may have and how these beliefs can be overcome. Welcome to Worthy Mother Podcast. I'm your host, Emily Hardy, a mom of two on a mission to help moms everywhere feel less alone. This is not a parenting podcast. Instead, it's a space for pushing back against societal expectations of perfection and embracing self-compassion in your motherhood journey. Let's get into it. Joining me today is Kamini Wood, a mother of five and a certified life coach who helps high achievers heal their relationships with themselves. Kamini, welcome to the podcast. So happy to have you here. Can you just tell us a little about who you are?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited for this conversation. I am mom of five. So first and foremost, I am a mother to five. They range in age from 23 down to 11. So we've got the gamut going on there. But what I do on a daily basis is I do work with people one-to-one exclusively, and I'm really working with them on unpacking mainly what are those limiting beliefs? What are those beliefs that are holding them back in creating the life that they really want for themselves? Because oftentimes, especially with high achievers, we don't really even know that something's holding us back, but we know that we either feel stuck or we feel like we're missing something, or there's just something that's not fully aligned. And so the work that I really do with people is helping unpack that together in a very safe space, right? And it's not with any shame or judgment or we need to fix something. It's more if we offer space to understand it and create that deeper relationship with oneself, there's so much opportunity and potential to live into whatever it is you want personally or professionally.
Yeah, I love that. It is important work that you're doing because, as I said, so many of us do kind of come up against these limits that we
Mm-hmm.
set for ourselves. And so to be able to have that support to work through that and get to the other side of what we believe might be our limits is powerful because there is so much potential in each of us to do whatever it is, right? It's not just like career goals or being the best mom or anything. It's like just whatever your heart desires, whatever you're called to do. We have
Mm-hmm.
so much potential if we can just kind of unlock that.
Yes, yes. I love that word, unlock it, unleash it, right? It's just
Yeah.
allow for the container that we've put ourselves in, allow those doors to open and see what is possible.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about your own story, really thinking about how becoming a mother impacted your identity
Mhm.
and how it maybe even informed the way of your life and the career that you've chosen.
Well, that is such a great question, and I'll try not to be too long-winded about how I answer this question. But for me personally, I grew up in a predominantly white town. So my parents are immigrants. So I'm first generation American. One of the things that I did pretty early on was solve for myself how I was going to fit in. And the way that I solved it was I was going to people please and to make sure that people were happy with me. And I did the things that were considered acceptable, right? So that then I would fit in and belong. Well, beyond that, as I mentioned, my parents were immigrants. So they were working just a lot in order to provide for my sister and I. And so my perfectionist tendencies kind of took over as well. Because if I did things well and perfectly, they didn't have to worry about me. So this fear of being a burden kind of dissipated. So you take those two things and you put them together in a nice little mash mixing bowl, and you end up with somebody who also becomes a very high achiever, right? It becomes, I need to perform and what's next, and all of these different ideas. Took that into my adulthood. When I became a mother, it also was part of it, right? I need to do this well. I need to do this perfectly. I need to please. I need to make sure they're okay. So the over functioning, over giving really took hold because now I've got these individuals who I feel fully responsible for also, in my mix of my world. However, I will say that once they became preteens and started emulating the people pleasing perfectionist tendencies. And now I could sit on the other side and see it. It was a huge wake up call because that was a mirror. I recognized they learned that from how I've been showing up. It wasn't like immediate, it was over time. But, I remember specifically with my middle daughter, just an interaction she had with one of her friends. And that was the moment that I think it really hit me that, wow, this is learned behavior. And so for me, it was, I need to do some self work here because otherwise, if I don't start showing up differently, they're going to continue down this path. And if in the realm of being that high achiever and wanting to do the best, I recognize, let me do this work in order to then be able to communicate it to my kids. As I was going through that process, to what you've said earlier, I recognize so many of us have this experience or a similar experience. And I felt called truly in my heart that I needed to now take this personal experience and learn how to facilitate it with other people, learn how to help them so that they don't have to go down the long journeyed path that I took in order to get there, that we can actually do that work a little bit earlier. And so that's really what's led me to why. So I would say motherhood was the catalyst, and it also opened up this doorway to do what I do.
I love thinking about that connection with how our kids, like seeing the experience of our kids and seeing how they maybe mirror us, how they, are taking on what we're modeling for them can be this opportunity for us to look at ourselves and to do the work for ourselves. Because it really, you can't do that for your daughter, right? You can't
Right.
do that work for her because it's the whole point of it is that you've been doing these things for other people. You've been putting
Mm-hmm.
on this kind of, I don't even know if facade's the right word because it's just like you're doing the quote right thing. You're doing what you think you're supposed to do and it becomes like part of who you are. And so
Mm-hmm.
to see that and recognize that in your child, there's this moment of like, okay, I need to work on this for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to come from a place of working on it for you because that's the whole issue. So
Yes.
it's I
Yes.
think there's so many things that our kids can kind of show to us. I think about like with our triggers and how our kids can set us off in ways that we've never been set off before. I know that for me,
Yes.
that is like a massive part of my motherhood experience. And, as I've worked on it, it continues to be. But there are these things that it's like, oh, you're just actually carrying on the patterns of behaviors that I've had of just the way I'm showing up in life and what a
Yeah.
powerful reflection that can be.
It's huge. And just offering yourself grace as you go through it, right? But just recognizing, I love how you just said that the triggers they are indication that something's going on for yourself more than
Yeah.
anything. Because
Yeah.
most often I will say that when my kids have activated or triggered me, it's because they're reflecting back to me something that it's an invitation for me to work on something or to at least become more aware of something. I mean, this has happened time and time again, even with academics, for instance, being this high achiever perfectionist, it used to trigger me every time that they would, you know, fight back on homework and then we would butt heads but once I started doing that work, it was, okay, this is really interesting. I'm getting really triggered by this. This is my stuff. And once I work on that, my communication also shifts with my kids. And it's not to say we don't care. Like, it's not to say I'm not going to, want for them to, be the best that they can be, but in what context, right? Is
Yeah.
it you're a bad person if you don't get straight A's, or is the context completely shifted now?
That has been a really interesting thing that I'm going through. My oldest son, is in first grade right now, and I was that kid who, like, I did really well at school. Like, I was good at it and I could perform the heck out of it, and I was well liked by my teachers. Like, I just fit that
Right.
role, and
Right.
I still like say if I could go to school professionally, like I'm great at it. My first grader, he struggles. He has a really hard time fitting into the classroom. And I was an elementary school teacher for 3 years, and I've been in classrooms. I know that not all kids are the same.
Mhm.
I have this background of knowing, like, yeah, some kids are not going to function in the classroom in the way that we expect them to. Like, I know
Right.
that. And yet
Right.
still navigating, how do I show up here? How do I support him while not putting the pressure on him? It's
Yes.
wild. It is such a like mind thing. And
Oh,
I'm
it
living it
totally
every day.
is. It totally is, but in context that you can know that cognitively, right?
Yeah.
Because that's your training.
Yes.
But then when it's your own child, it's the inner work of what am I making this mean
Yeah.
about me, about my
Yes.
mothering, about all the other limiting beliefs that pop up? Because that's usually what we trace it back to, is there's
Yeah.
some meaning thing or some belief that we have around, if my child doesn't do this, then it means this.
Hmm.
And so, and then if we can allow, at least bring that to the awareness, then you can tap into that training that
Yeah.
you have and say, okay, so what other ways might I want to approach this?
Yeah. The awareness is so key. It has to be the first step. You have to be aware of what you are making it mean. I actually did an episode a couple months back on how we do tend to attach our worth to our child's like perceived goodness and how we think other people are perceiving them. And it's something we do automatically. And you have to really like look at that and understand, okay, this is happening. And I'm not going to be hard on myself for that happening. We
Right.
were, most of us were raised and kind of conditioned to be people pleasers. So it makes sense that we're going to care about what others think. It makes sense that we're going to want to do good and have our kids do good. But when we can really bring awareness to the fact that that's happening, then we can look at it and say, what do I actually believe here? And that's
Yes.
huge. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's a game changer, really. And yes, you're absolutely right. We are conditioned to believe or to people please. And, just as common humanity, right? Just part of the
Yeah.
human race. We
Yeah.
want to be kind to people. We want to be nice. I mean, so there's that, it's the delicate dance that we're doing, right? That
Totally.
balance that we're trying to figure out.
Yeah, not all bad.
Yeah.
So I want to just talk about because I think this might give some aha moments to moms out there listening. What do you see happening when these high achievers, these people who have grown up performing well and doing their best and showing up in a way that is pleasing to everyone, what happens
Mhm.
when they become moms?
All of that you
Yeah.
just described gets carried right into motherhood. Right now it becomes, I need to do this well, and I need to, like I mentioned, please my kids. I need to make sure that I am looked at in a light of where I'm perceived as having it together, that I'm perceived as being able to provide for my kids, and also maybe potentially still accelerate professionally. Whatever that story is, whatever we had previously, we're just bringing that right into motherhood, most of us, right? And unless we become aware of it, that then also leads to the limiting beliefs we have about it, because what happens is we hold ourselves to this really high standard. Something doesn't go exactly how we had in our minds of what is the right way to do this. And now suddenly we have the limiting beliefs of, I'm not good at this, I can't do it, I'm not good enough, I'm a terrible mother, right? All of those things, which then shakes our confidence and our own belief in self around our capabilities of bringing this new human up into this world.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, yep, can relate to that. Right? It's interesting. So there's these limiting beliefs, I'm not good enough, and all of the other stuff that comes with it.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, I want to talk about how it can be the limiting beliefs about like the role of being a mother, but also about the things outside of that, about
Yeah.
the career and the like hobbies, like just whatever it is, those feelings of I can't do all of this. Like I'm not good enough to be able to like manage all these different pieces. Curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think what I found and what I've noticed is that belief of not good enough, while it might be attached to a role that we're
Uh-huh.
playing, really when we dive into it, it's actually the belief about self. It's like at that
Yeah.
foundational level, right? It's the either I'm unworthy or I'm not good enough or I have to prove my worth, it's at that foundational level, and it's then coming out in these roles that we're playing. And because motherhood tends to be something that we value so close, it's the one that will hone in on, and that's the one that we
Hmm.
really have strong feelings around, and that we really might feel that I'm not good enough, versus like, let's say like I'm terrible at art, like, so for me that I'm not good enough at art, like I might say that and have that belief, but it's like, it doesn't really affect me so
Yeah.
much, because like it's just one, it's not something that I truly value. I value art, but for me personally it is not a core value or core thing that I work on.
Totally.
However, motherhood, totally. I mean, like, if I have that moment of I'm not good enough, my rabbit hole thinking can absolutely take, and I will spiral, because that for me is also a value. It's a true core value of mine. And so that's what I've also noticed is that we'll have those limiting beliefs kind of on the foundation. And then we really see it and feel it when we're leaning into something that we actually value or is
Yeah.
meaningful to us.
Yeah. there can be a piece there of sometimes spiraling about everything because we're not recognizing what we actually value. And I mean, I see that with moms in trying to juggle it all, trying to be this incredible mom while also being this, boss babe powerhouse at
Mm-hmm.
work and, keeping up with this great workout routine and being the perfect wife, all these things, right? And maybe there is importance in all those things, but it can, if you kind of pile it all on of like, I'm not good enough in any of these areas, how crippling that can be. And
Right,
some of it
right.
might be just identifying, okay, what are the things that I can just let go of that belief in because it actually doesn't matter.
Right. Yes. Yes. And also, where might I be spinning out trying to do all these things that
Yeah.
actually don't matter as much to me? Right. Because we're trying to
Yeah.
achieve that I'm handling everything.
Doing everything.
Well, what is that badge of honor really? And where does it
Yeah.
come from?
Yeah. Like, why is that the measure of success? I actually think that would be interesting to talk about, thinking about how we do determine our own success and what we're kind of holding ourselves up against. I think there's a lot of societal messages out there
Mhm.
about what success means for women, and that can
Yes.
impact us in all those different roles, in motherhood, in marriage, in work, all the things. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I completely agree with you. I think that what happens is we are so impacted by the messages receiving from society. I mean, granted, society, cultural too. I definitely, with some of my clients, just the cultural dynamics of
Yeah.
how they've been raised, that also plays a part in it. How you were brought up in your family of origin, your own personal, all of this has an effect. But I do think that what happens is we start taking on the definition of success from an outside external source. And then we're chasing something that really doesn't, once again we go back to meaning, like we haven't had any say in what really matters to us, so we're chasing
Yeah.
this thing called success and we don't even know if that's the thing that most aligns with us. And so that's
Yeah.
why it really begs and invites this, taking a step back and saying, okay, what actually matters to me and who do I want to be, right? Like, so it's not just the roles that we're playing, but like who and how do I want to show up as mom, right? Who do I want to be when I'm mom? Instead of thinking about it as like, how do I want the world to perceive me? It's how do I want to be in the world? Starting to go back to those self-directed questions and understanding so that then as you are defining what success is, you're actually doing it from your inside out versus this outside idea of what success is. Because the truth is, somebody could say that they're really successful and I could sit there and say I don't agree, like I don't, because I am measuring it from my perspective. But here we are spinning our wheels day in and day out trying to chase what somebody else out there has determined is success. And I think as high achievers, who are moms, I think that's something that we get caught up in pretty much from day one, right? There's the right way to nurse or not to nurse. There's a right way to dress your baby. There's a right way to, swaddle your baby. I mean, we're hit with
Yeah.
it immediately. And it's what works for me, what would be success for me versus trying to constantly chase something outside of ourselves.
Yeah. So I know you gave a few questions in there that you can start to ask yourself to kind of determine what's coming from external versus internal. Do you have any advice for like somebody who's like, okay, I know that there's like the standards that I've set for myself are not, they're not realistic and they're not necessarily mine. They're not from me. Do you have any
Mhm.
suggestions on how to like sit with that and maybe exercises to go through to determine that?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is sit down with a piece of paper and write
Yeah.
down what those rules are or what is that definition I've been working with? What is the container that I've put myself in? Get it on paper. And the reason why I say that is because when we can actually put it on paper, we give ourselves space between it and us, and we can now actually sit in observer mode. Because so often when it's in our heads, we are over identifying with it. So it gives us that space to actually say, okay, this is the thought or this is the rule I've created for myself. And here I am. And now, as an observer, what do I actually think about that? Does this align with my values? What even are my values? And really start writing them down. And then from that place, say, okay, well, now that I've seen this rule that I've made for myself and I'm recognizing where I am, what is it that I want to set up for myself? What would be success? And you break it down. It's not just overarching. So you can't just say motherhood. It's like really dial it down to granular things, right? Like what is success when it comes to, like for instance, for academics for my kid? what is success when it comes to extracurriculars, because we have different rules for different things. And it's important to just bring those to the awareness as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really important tip right there of like breaking it down to the individual things because that does feel overwhelming when you feel like first supporting your child in academics, extracurricular, social emotional, how they're doing at home, if they're eating foods. I mean, that's something with my kid, like the eating foods.
Yep.
It's like, oh, am I doing enough to like get him to be eating foods besides the few things he eats? And if you are kind of letting it all just like meld around in your head and you are, quote, failing at all of it, it becomes this like, I don't even know where I'm measuring myself to. I don't know what's important to me in any of these little pieces because it all just feels hard. And maybe we're having tons of success in one area, right? Like
Yes.
my kid is loving soccer practice and he does really well at his games and he's listening to his coach and I'm so proud of him and I've been able to provide that for him. But it's like, it's just all up there as part of this mess of like, I'm not living up to the expectation that I think I've set for
Yes.
myself. And so when you can break that down and look at the individual pieces, it not only then gives you like a path forward in those pieces because you can say, okay, what is the goal? What is the measure of success? How can I work towards that based on my values? But it also just kind of separates that whole mess of stuff that brings on those limiting
Yeah.
beliefs so full force.
Oh my gosh. And you're spot on with that, because what you said is really, really important. I want people to maybe take this nugget is
Yeah.
by doing that, we also see the successes we're having, because it's so easy to just focus on, in our heads, especially, this isn't working, it's not enough. But we forget my kid really enjoys soccer practice. And then we also can celebrate that, but then get even more curious with that. Like, am I showing up differently in that
Hmm.
context? Who am I being as mom in that context? What is it about soccer, right? Where we can then recognize what are the strengths in that. And then we can actually start shifting that and applying that in those other areas where we're not feeling that it's working the way that we want it to work.
Yeah.
So we can use that to complement rather than letting it all sit up in our head and it's just this big mess of, I can't do any of this. I'm failing at all of it. We actually see and we can build upon that. It's a play off of gratitude, right? It's what
Yeah.
is going well. What can I appreciate here? We then shift it from this negative bias into a more optimistic outlook.
Yeah. I just want to say for anyone listening, if you feel that feeling of like everything is not going well right now, first of all, I've been there and I have been there recently. It's that happens and there's so much going on in life that sometimes sitting down and like being really intentional about what the thoughts are can be really challenging because it can
Mm.
just get overwhelming in life. But I just want to say to you that you are not failing at everything. First of all, you're probably failing at nothing if we really look at how we measure success and what's actually important to you. So that's really important. But if you actually look at the individual things, there are probably also things that you are having massive success in. And I
Mm.
just want to make sure that that's really clear because if you are caught up in that overwhelm of, I'm not good enough, I'm failing at things, it can be really hard to identify those things that you're doing well at and we can just get caught in that cycle. So I just want to call that out, say that, take that, that is for you. Like you are not failing at everything, even the things that, you think you might not be doing the best at. But there's
Oh
things
my
that you're
gosh.
doing
Yeah.
really well at.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're there.
I want to second that. I mean, we're human beings,
Yeah.
right? And I think we all get stuck in that
Yeah.
cycle. I call it like the rip current, right? Where we
Yep.
can't quite get out of it. It's the thing we're just spinning and spinning. And it is important to recognize that you're not failing at everything. It's also looking at failure slightly differently is, again, we can define success. We also define failure,
Yeah.
right? And so we can look at what we are defining as failure and actually call that out and say, is this really a failure? Because one thing that I always ask myself is, especially being a perfectionist, and when I get caught in that loop of I'm failing at this, I take a pause and it's okay, but what's one thing that I might have learned here? Or what's one
Yeah.
thing that what's one nugget that I call it mining for gold, right? It's just give me one little speck, and then it shifts the idea that this is failure into, okay, well, actually, there's something that I got out of this. Okay, what do I want to do with this now? And how
Yeah.
can I build upon it?
Yeah. We can learn from even those things where it's like, yep, that was not how I wanted to handle it, or like, oh, I've been not showing up for my kid in this way, and
Mhm.
we've gotten to a point where XYZ, it's like, okay, there's something in there to learn. And I think
Yes.
that
Yes.
that's really important. And I also think, just to kind of bring it back around to what we model for our kids and how we attach our worth to how they are performing potentially,
Hmm.
that when we can get really clear and identify how we are defining those failures and what we're making believe are failures, if we can really think about, do I want my child to feel like this is a failure? That can be really
Yes.
helpful. And like, no, if they, you know, are not the best friend, if they're not super there for their friend because they have a lot going on, which maybe I'm being really hard on myself for
Hmm.
doing that in my life, would I want my child to feel like they've failed at being a good friend? No. When things get hard, they may need to show up more for themselves. I don't think that they would be a bad person because they aren't able to show up for other people in their lives in that time. So, using that as kind of a measuring point of like, if I wouldn't want my child to feel like a failure if this was happening in their life, maybe I should look at what I'm making it mean about me.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's self-compassion in action,
Yeah.
right? Because a lot of times we hold ourselves these really high standards. Putting a spin on it and saying, what would I want to tell my child in this
Yeah.
situation allows us to be able to see it from that perspective and then turn that and offer that to ourselves.
hmm And
Yeah.
then they get the benefit of it too, which is just like a little added cherry on top of
Yes.
like, then
Yes.
they're seeing us showing up for ourselves with self-compassion, and they are then able to learn that for themselves. Like, huge. It's like you can get trapped in these, negative cycles of spiraling, but you can also take the steps out of that then spiral in a really positive way, which is
Yes.
really hopeful.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Hopeful and it opens up possibility.
Yeah. So, thinking of kind of those specific limiting beliefs, and I know we've talked about like redefining success for ourselves and things like that, but is there anything else that we can do to kind of start to overcome those limiting beliefs about ourselves?
Well, we sort of talked about this already, but the very first step is that awareness, right? So
hmm
becoming aware and acknowledging. I think a lot of times what happens is we kind of have an idea that that might be a belief out there, and then we like almost want to turn away from it. And so my take on it is go towards it, but not towards it as in I'm going to go sit in it and become it. It's more, wow, I'm acknowledging, like I'm becoming aware and I'm acknowledging that I've been carrying this belief.
Yeah.
And then you can start breaking down that belief by, again, going back to paying attention to what you value, but also what's true for you now. Because most often those limiting beliefs started some point earlier in life where there maybe was an experience or a message you received, an internalization of something that created this idea that, like, I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy. And so we come back to present moment. Well, what's actually true for me now at this stage in my life? Oftentimes we recognize that there are so many things that we are doing really well. And it's not just the things that we're doing, it's who we're being. Even the fact that we're willing to sit in the discomfort of doing that self reflection, that's a huge win right there. let's
Pat on the
please
back.
not let's please not just jump past that, because that is difficult work to be able to sit in the discomfort of saying, wow, I'm going to choose to take a look at myself. But
Yeah.
it really is, it's about becoming aware and then going through your values and going through what's actually true. And then for me, it's always about, and now with this information, what's the new values based action am I going to take? Right. Because awareness is that great first step, but then it's, am I going to walk through the doorway? What am I going to do with this now? And so that values based action, so look about for me that I'm not good enough, it still pops up. I'll notice it, I'll acknowledge it's there. And it's like, okay, what's actually true? And then with my values, what am I going to do now? Even if it's a small thing. For me, especially with the motherhood, my values based action might be I'm going to go sit with my kids and engage in some activity with them. Doesn't have to be huge, but what that does is I'm already breaking down that I'm not good enough, because here I am taking a values based action, spending mindful quality time with my kids. Even if it's 10 minutes, I've taken that action and I'm breaking down and working outside of that belief that I'm not good enough.
Yeah, that's hugely important. As you're saying all of that, I separated from my kid's dad. We separated about 5 months ago. And, there's like I've talked about it on the podcast, but there's the waves of, I guess, like grief and like the different limiting beliefs that come up with that transition, right? And I think it's important to recognize that, like, in life, there will be all kinds of things that will bring about different new limiting beliefs. And it's not, you're never done with like, oh, I figured it all out and I'm super confident in myself, right? It's like,
Right.
yes, you might get to a point where like they're not coming in the same way because you've broken down some of those like inner beliefs, but they come up. And
Sure.
that has been something for me that the awareness and identifying those things. And I want to like just acknowledge it for myself. Like you said, it's important to recognize like sitting with those beliefs of like the not good enough, the whatever it might be. It's so hard to do, but it
Mm-hmm.
also is so necessary to do for that healing. And yes, there's like the forward movement that then has to come to really get through that, but the allowing yourself to really acknowledge that and sit with that. And I've been going to therapy and all the good stuff. It's like it's
Right.
doing the work and saying, "Wow, that belief is actually impacting how I'm showing up in all areas of my life right now."
Right.
Looking at that sucks, but it's also so, so necessary. And so, just for anyone, like doing that work is something worth congratulating because it's
100%.
huge. And
Yes.
like you are so worthy of that. You are so worthy of looking at the things that you are thinking and saying, I'm not going to allow myself to just stop here because I deserve.
Yes. I deserve more. And the other thing that I want to say as a
Yeah.
caveat to that or a tangent to that is
Yeah.
it is the way we unshame. Because when we don't
Yes.
acknowledge it and sit with it, what we're really actually doing is covertly shaming ourselves. But by sitting and acknowledging it and just looking at it, we're taking that first step in unshaming.
Yeah.
Because that shame is the thing that holds us back. It's the where our whole not good enough comes. There's a constant shaming, right? And so just sitting with it and acknowledging it's so brave. And I want everybody to hear that it is so incredibly brave to do the work,
Yeah.
but it is such an important step because we have to unshame. Because when we have those beliefs and we just keep them up here and we don't give them the witness that they need, those beliefs need, we just continue to shame ourselves into them.
Oh, that's so powerful. That is such a just like full circle back to like why we might be believing these things about ourselves in the first place is because we've been conditioned through shame, through feeling like we have to show up a certain way to be good enough. Because if we don't show up that way, we may be shamed for it or feel ashamed of it, even if it's not
Yeah.
people externally being like, no,
Right,
bad
right,
kid, whatever it is.
right.
But just like how powerful that is. Like if you bring it forward, if you write it down, if you share it, if you say it out loud, if you identify that for yourself, it no longer is this shameful little thing. It's like, nope, it's out there. Here
Yes.
it is. I'm looking at it. It exists.
Yes. Yes. It exists here and I'm
Hmm.
here. I'm
Yeah.
not it. Right.
Yeah.
So we've created that space too. But that's the thing with shame is it builds and it grows in the dark. And
Yeah.
my best analogy for it is it's like mold. It's gonna sit if it's in the
Yes.
dark and it's like wet and gross, it's gonna continue to grow. If we bring it into the light, we shine light, it no longer has the potency
Yeah.
anymore to continue to grow and fester. And that's what shame is. It needs to be witnessed. The
Yeah.
longer it goes unwitnessed, the more it just continues to grow and take hold.
Yeah. And acknowledging that that is hard. It is hard if you are feeling deep shame about something to then pull that out. I mean, to share that with somebody else can be so scary. It takes so much bravery, but it, like you said, it has to, the acknowledgement, the awareness of it has to happen for the progress and for the overcoming. And what a beautiful thing. And so, like, yes, have all the self-compassion if that feels hard, because it
Yes.
is. And also, you are so worthy of it.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. I this is so amazing. So many great little pieces in here. Towards the end of these conversations, I love just asking about self-care specifically. I'm a huge believer in the fact that as moms, we really need to prioritize and be intentional about prioritizing our own care. And so I love just asking, how do you care for yourself? And do you have any advice for moms just to make sure that they are also caring for themselves regularly?
Yeah. So my self care, what I have done is I carve out the morning before everybody gets up. It's kind of my time to not have to be on. I'm not taking care of anybody else. It's just my time. So that could include either a workout, sometimes meditation, sometimes it's just sitting quietly. I used to hold myself to like, it has to be this. And so my self-care also includes being flexible with what it is. What do I feel like doing today? But just the basis of it is an intentional hour to myself. That's just for me. Now, for moms, and especially new moms, that's not always possible to have all of that time. So my biggest suggestion to people is carve out even 5 minutes for yourself where you're just, you're mindfully being with your own self, because it can be difficult as moms, especially as we're juggling all these different things. Maybe it's as you're getting into the car to run to something, before you get out of the car, you give yourself the 5 minutes, just sit in quiet and just be with yourself and just pay attention to your own breath, or, just being quiet without constantly, because most of us will be like, okay, I got to get out of the car and I got to go to the next thing. So for me, self-care is not about spa days. It's about when can I just reconnect with myself? So even if you're carving out 5 minutes, that's a huge start, and you should congratulate yourself for that and see if you can build upon that.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that, like, just sit in the car. When you're in the car, just sit there for a little extra time because we all know we want to do it. So just do it intentionally. And that
Yes.
can be a really fantastic start.
Yes, I will say that I absolutely do it to this
Oh, yeah.
day, or before I get out of the car, especially if I'm going into like a meeting or something, just sit there for a couple
Just sit
minutes
there.
extra.
Yeah,
Go
give
in.
yourself that little buffer and just sit and be. There's not a whole lot of distractions when you're just sitting in the car, right? You can't go like do the dishes. So it's a good
Right,
spot
right. Yes,
to
yes.
make that happen and to do that without having to, yeah, fight all the distraction.
Yeah, exactly. I just that because that's totally what I would do if I were at home. I'd go
It
do the
is. It's
laundry or
totally,
something.
yeah. And I think sitting with ourselves can be, again, it can be another hard thing that like you just, even if it's not like super hard, it's like you just avoid it. So it's like you just go on to the next thing if you are able to. So if there's a meeting and you can't go in for 5 more minutes, or you don't have to go in for 5 more minutes, that's a good spot to just be
Good
like,
spot. Mhm.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
just gonna take this time. It's no big deal.
Exactly. Exactly.
Love that. Where can listeners connect with you, find out more about what you do? All of it.
All of it. I am on the internet at kaminiwood.com. That's, they can hop over there. There's actually a free downloadable ebook on limiting beliefs. So if,
Amazing.
your listeners are interested in that. And then I'm on Instagram and Facebook with the handle It's Authentic Me.
Amazing. And I will make sure that that is all linked and easy to find in the show notes so that, anyone who's interested in tackling these big things in their life to just improve the way you're able to show up for yourself and feel in the way that you are living your life, they'll have access to connect with you and learn more about it. Thank
Amazing.
you so much for being here. This was an incredible conversation, one that I think there's going to be a lot of listeners who might feel called out in the best way of like, yep, I relate to that. And in that, knowing that there is this beautiful path forward.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed this conversation, so I appreciate having the time with you.
Oh, and thank you for tuning in. I will see you next week. You are worthy, Mama.